In this lesson, we're going to learn how to model the connectors for our springs. Alright, so let's go to our left view by hitting L on the keyboard. And I'm going to just select all of the objects in my scene. I'm going to hide those. So let's hide selection. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a line to trace out the shape of our connectors. Now we probably could use box modeling methods, but we have two connectors, one for the front and one for the rear. And while they're going to be very similar in shape, they're going to have some subtle differences in the overall curvature in certain areas. So using a line is going to give me a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm under Shapes and then Line. And let's go ahead and trace out this first one. So starting right here, I'm going to left click and create a point. And let's go to about midway in this line here. And I'm going to create three going around the top. So one on this side, one at the topmost part, and then off to the right. And let's come all the way down here to this point on our connector. Now this looks to be like we're cutting off that entire curve, but what we're going to do is we're going to change our tangent types of our vertices and get that shape. So I'm going to left click out here, and then we'll go up to this point here and then end here. Let's close that spline, and then now what we want to do is we want to go to our modify panel and vertex mode, and let's select all of the vertices in that line. Let's right click and go to our quad menu, and let's change it from corner, which gives us those linear lines, and let's change it to Bezier corner. And this is going to allow us to reshape our object. So with all of these, let's select each individual vertex and grab our move tool, and let's move the handles to reshape this. Let's make sure that the X and Y are both highlighted in yellow. So if it's not, you can left click right here, and it should constrain the X and Y directions. Let's move each handle and get the shape that we want out of our connector. So I'm going to pull those down, and I'm going to pull that back a little bit. And I'm just left clicking or using the marquee selection around each vertex because I want to make sure that I get every single handle that is available to reshape this object. I might pull that vertex out just a little bit more. Okay. And to be honest, let's go ahead and convert this to Bezier because I want that to be very smooth right there. So I'm going to reshape this a little bit more. That looks good. And we'll take this one and pull that out to get the rest of our curvature for that object. So that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that shape. And then let's select this and pull that there. And just trying to get the base shape of our connectors. Now on these curves that are supposed to be really smooth, let's right click on those and switch those to Bezier just to make sure that we don't get any unnecessary lines in our geometry. So that looks good. Happy with that. Let's make sure that we do all of these here. Set those to Bezier. That's just going to create a very smooth transition between those. Alright, so that looks good. And now what I want to do is I want to make a copy of that and create the same thing for this object here. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag that up to this point, and I'm going to hit OK on this. Now before we start reshaping this particular object, let's get these into position. So I'm going to hit P on the keyboard to go to my perspective view, and I'm going to pull this back, and I'm going to go to my front view by hitting F on the keyboard. And let's pull this back to this connector here. And I'm going to take this front line, or this line here, and pull it back over to here. So that one's matched up pretty well as far as the size and everything goes. Now this one we're going to have to reshape just a little bit. So in our left view, let's go to vertex mode, and let's make those changes. So I'm going to move the individual vertices into position and then modify their shape as I move those. Okay, so let's take this one, and I'm going to pull that up to here. That one looks pretty good. I'm going to have to pull this back a little bit. Okay, because what this is going to do is it's going to create an area for the back of the car shell to fit into. Okay, and this is going to wrap over the top. Okay, now looking at this, we can match this up to our reference image, but we really need to match it up to the car shell that we have modeled. So let's unhide that. So I'm going to right click and unhide all. And let's go into our perspective view. And you can see here that is pretty close, but we need to come up over the top of that. Now there's a couple of things that we could do. We could move the line, or we can move the back of the shell. But I think the line is going to be a little bit easier. And that's going to get us a little off on our reference image, but that's okay. So with that selected, let's grab our vertices that we need to. And we're going to just grab this one here at the end and pull that straight up. Let's hit F3, and that's up over the top as it should be. And let's take this one and pull that up. And then let's reshape these as we need to. So I'm going to pull this one up. And I'm just going to pull that vertex all the way up there. So here you can see that that is going to wrap up underneath. And let's take these bottom vertices here. And let me grab those. And let me pull that straight up in the Z just so it's resting right on that frame. Now let's go to our left view by hitting L and then F3. And let's modify the shape to be a little more appealing. So I'm going to right click and convert that to Bezier. And let's move these handles, create exactly what we want out of our object. And I'm going to pull that down. And let me pull that one in a little bit closer. And make the adjustments to these handles. And you can see that it seems like that's getting off a little bit, but it's really not that bad. Very flexible to work with lines, especially on shapes like this. Okay, so let's make our final adjustments to this. I could pull that out a little bit more, make some adjustments to that handle. And overall, I'm pretty happy with that. Take this, and we'll pull that down. And I want to make that a little bit thinner. Okay, something kind of along those lines there. And that looks pretty good. So now that we have our connectors shaped out, we need to create our geometry for these particular objects. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to go to my Modify panel, and I'm going to use Extrude. Now Extrude is going to create geometry and just extrude it out based on the amount that we put here in our parameter. So let's make sure that that's set to 1.0. And then I'm also going to kind of soften the edges a little bit. So I'm going to also use another modifier called Edit Poly. Now, this may seem a little odd because we've been converting everything over to editable poly. And you'll notice that it makes the modifier stack look a little bit different. However, under that Edit Poly modifier, I have all the same tools available. So why would we want to use this Edit Poly instead of just converting it down to an editable poly object? Well, this process of using modifiers to model is called procedural modeling. And this allows us to make changes as needed. So we may not be necessarily certain that the shape is going to work for us. So we still want the flexibility of using that line. So as of right now, I want to go back down to my line and I want to change the shape. So I just want to pull that up there. And then once I'm finished, I can go back to Edit Poly and you'll see that that has been updated automatically for me. Same thing back here. Let's go ahead and add our Extrude modifier. And let me find that there. There we go. And then let's also add our Edit Poly modifier, just like we did before. Okay. And I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard so I can focus on this object. And that one looks pretty good. We're not going to have any issues there. So everything is very flexible at this point. Now, the one drawback that we have to some of these modifiers is that if I were to make a change under the Edit Poly modifier on this object, so let's say that I select the polygons here, and I want to soften those edges. So what I could do is I could go ahead and hold down Control and convert that to an edge selection, and then chamfer those edges. So if I do that, you can see that that begins to chamfer those. Let's take our amount way down, and we just kind of want to soften that a little bit. Now by doing this and hitting OK and turning off edge mode, if I go back down into my line, it's going to give me a warning, and it's saying that the modifier exists in the stack and it depends on its topology. So if I change any effects in my line, it might destroy what I've done here in my Edit Poly stack or modifier. Okay, so it's saying the dependent modifier is Edit Poly. If I want to continue, I can hit Hold Yes, and it will try its best to save those changes. However, if I make some changes under my line. So let's say that I change the shape a little bit and I go back to editable poly. We might have some topology that has been destroyed. We may have to recover that. And it may even come to the point to where we have to remove the edit poly modifier and then reapply it. So those are just some things to think about. And again, this just makes sure that everything is very flexible, and if I need to come back and make any changes. So I'm going to do the same thing to this front connector. And let's convert our selection from polygon to edge by holding down Control and selecting edge. And let's apply our chamfer tool. So we're going to take that way down and just adjust that, okay, until we get a nice chamfered edge there, and hit OK. Turn that off. And there we have our connectors. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and change the color and apply their material. And there we go. And I'm going to leave them just the way they are. Now we're going to make some copies of those here in just a few moments. We're going to copy those over and mirror them. We're also going to get our tires, and we're going to talk about how to do that in the next lesson. So we're going to be grouping this stuff together, mirroring them over, and then we're going to talk about how to get everything connected into one solid piece for our suspension. So I'll see you then.